Cold, quiet, a voice from beyond the moment. The sound of the latch was soft, not the kind of sound that echoes, not the kind that gets remembered, but it was final. The door clicked shut, metal into metal. Then, her fingers slid the bolt across. From the outside and inside, a cry, high, cracking, small hands pounding against the door, too weak to make a sound the world would care about. "Mama!" She stood motionless in the frozen hallway, dust floating in shafts of weak light. The child's scream clawed through the air like an animal dying. Still, she didn't move, didn't scream back, didn't crumble, didn't even whisper a goodbye. She closed her eyes and turned the key in her hand once, slowly, then stepped away. Behind her, the bunker door throbbed with every bang of her baby's fists. But she didn't stop walking. She moved down the hallway like a shadow with nowhere left to hide. At the end of the corridor, a soldier stood frozen, his rifle lowered, his mouth slightly open. "You locked it?" She nodded. "Your child is inside." She didn't correct him. He looked past her, toward the door still rattling with small fists. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "You think I'm a monster." So did he. "But before you curse my name, before you say what you would have done, before you turn away from the sound of a crying child locked in a steel box, you need to hear the rest." Cut to black. A brief moment of silence. Then, a cough, a lullaby in a broken voice, the hum of an old radio fading into static. There was once a girl with a fever, and a mother who would have died to save her. And then one day, she did something worse. A single image lingers. A torn piece of paper on the ground, scrawled in smeared pencil. "Please forgive me." Fade out. Footsteps vanish into snow. The cries fade. The wind rises. And the question settles into the silence. Why did she lock the door? Before the world burned. Before the sirens. Before the sky split open and swallowed the future. She was just a mother. Not a hero. Not a cautionary tale. Just a woman in a quiet house, cutting an apple into perfect slices for a girl who didn't like the skin. The child sat in a faded blue sweater, legs dangling from a kitchen chair too tall for her. She had a cough again. It came and went, like everything else these days. She was small for her age, fragile. The mother placed the plate down gently, not because the girl was asleep, she wasn't, but because everything she did now was gentle. Gentle was all she had left. The radio murmured in the background, something about troop movements, something about the north. She turned it off, not because she didn't care, but because she couldn't care and stay sane. Instead, she looked at her daughter, thin arms, sunken cheeks, eyes too big for a face so small. And still, when she smiled, the room softened, like the sun, trying. The garden had stopped growing. The last frost came too early that year, too hard. She had covered the roots with blankets, cloth, prayer. Didn't work. That morning, she boiled water just to make steam, just to make the house feel alive. They hadn't had real heat in 2 weeks. She poured the water into a chipped bowl and placed it near the child's bed. It fogged the window slightly. She liked that, the illusion of warmth. On the calendar, someone had drawn a smiley face over the date. The girl's birthday. She was turning 3 today. The mother had no cake, no candles, but she had saved a single hard candy in a jar above the sink. Red, cherry, still wrapped. The girl would never know it wasn't what she wanted. She'd only know that her mother had given her something sweet in a world that had turned bitter. Before the war took everything, I still had one thing left, a reason to be careful, a reason to keep waking up, a child who thought I could fix anything. That afternoon, The sky turned the color of ash. The radio buzzed back to life on its own. Static, then sharp. Emergency alert, northern corridor breached. Sector evacuations in effect. She froze, knife halfway through a loaf of stale bread. Grabbed the radio, tuned the dial. Shelter in place protocol until further instructions. Do not attempt overland travel. Check child registration immediately. She dropped the knife. In the next room, the girl coughed, then laughed, gently, at nothing. The sound shattered her. She opened the cupboard, found the emergency kit, checked the food, the matches, the medication. Expired. Useless. The girl watched from the doorway, holding the red candy in her hand. "Mommy?" The mother turned too fast, knelt, smiled with her whole face. "You like it?" The child nodded, solemnly. "I'm saving it." That night, she sat in the hallway with the lights off, listening. Distant sirens, a low rumble, boots on pavement. She wrapped her daughter in a blanket and held her close. The child's breath against her collarbone was warm, soft, alive. She whispered a story, something about a bear and a snowstorm, but her voice kept cracking, and by the end, it was just silence. The last night at home wasn't the loud one. It wasn't fire. It wasn't glass. It was the quiet one. The one that asked, "What do you take when you know you won't come back?" She packed a bag, one change of clothes, a spoon, a photo, creased, of the child sleeping beside her late husband, and a marker. With it, she wrote the girl's name on the inside of her coat. Not for organization, not for style, for identification. She stood by the window and watched the snow begin to fall. It didn't look like the end of the world. It looked beautiful, cruel, and calm. The sirens came at 4:17 a.m. Not loud, not like the movies. Just a low, pulsing alarm, like a heartbeat sped up by fear. She was already awake, holding the child to her chest. The child stirred but didn't cry, too tired for fear, too used to uncertainty. Outside, voices, shouting, running. She stood, grabbed the bag, wrapped the blanket tighter around her daughter. No time for shoes, just movement. The sky was a strange, dirty orange. Snow falling in broken spirals. A neighbor ran past her porch, carrying a bag of rice and nothing else. A woman screamed behind a fence. The air was full of static, like the sound after lightning strikes. She didn't look back at the house. There was nothing there she hadn't already given up. Down the street, the road was blocked. Military trucks, soldiers with cold eyes and soft hands. Not yelling, just pointing. Moving people like cattle toward the subway station. The shelter, the one built for flood evacuations, not war. She stood in line, holding the child, the girl's breath against her shoulder. Fast, shallow. The bag felt heavier than it was. Her coat soaked with snow. She couldn't feel her hands. Someone behind her collapsed. No one turned. She heard a voice say, "They're not letting in anyone over 50. Another, "Only one child per ID tag." She looked down at her child, sick, small, and the people around her, clutching 2, 3, sometimes 4 children at once. She tightened her grip. "Not yours. You don't owe them. You don't." The girl coughed. Wet, deep, the kind of cough that sounds like surrender. I told myself I wasn't like them, that I'd never be like them, but fear doesn't care about what kind of person you were. Near the subway stairs, she saw the nurse from their block. Gray coat, steel face, clipboard in hand, checking temperatures, turning people away without flinching. Too weak, too late. The mother hesitated, then stepped forward. "Help her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's sick. She needs warmth." The nurse scanned her, tired eyes, then looked at the child, looked back at the mother, then, without speaking, handed her a piece of cloth. Inside it, a single fever tablet, wrapped in a plastic glove. No label, no instructions. "Just hope?" She said thank you, but the nurse was already moving on. The line moved, down the stairs, into the dark. The mother adjusted the girl on her hip. The child stirred, whispering, "Are we going home?" The mother didn't answer. "No, we're not going home. We're going somewhere people forget themselves. And I'll have to become someone I'm afraid of, just to keep you alive." The steps echoed as they descended, each footfall pulling them deeper, away from the world, away from the light, away from everything that had once felt like living. At the bottom, a hallway of cement, wet walls, lanterns swaying on wires like tired ghosts. She stepped through the final doorway. A soldier slammed it shut behind her. That was the last time I saw the sky without blood in it. The shelter was a subway tunnel once. Now, it was a grave waiting for its dead. Concrete walls dripped condensation. The air was thick with rust, mold, and breath. Rows of bodies, lined up in sleeping bags, on cardboard, on nothing at all. No space for comfort, only function. They were assigned a corner, a single wool blanket, no questions asked. The mother sat on the cold floor with her child cradled in her lap. The girl's cough echoed in the cavern like a whisper trying to stay alive. That first night, no one slept, not really. People whispered, people cried. One man spoke to the wall for hours. A woman clawed at her arms until they bled. And in the center of it all, the child, burning with fever, eyes unfocused, breathing like every inhale was a decision she wasn't sure she could make again. The mother opened the cloth the nurse had given her. Inside, the fever tablet, still intact. She crushed it between her teeth, placed the powder on her fingertip, slipped it into the girl's mouth with water from a dented bottle. The child grimaced, then swallowed, then coughed again. I kept telling myself, just get through tonight. One night, one more breath, one more hour. But no one tells you that survival is always just 1 hour longer than you think you can stand. The soldier from the street patrolled the corridor. He didn't speak, just walked. Every hour, he scribbled notes on a clipboard. Names, numbers. He passed the mother and nodded. She didn't nod back. The refugee girl arrived on the second night. She was maybe 11. Thin arms, matted hair. Her face held a kind of silence that felt heavier than screaming. She carried a child, smaller, limp, her brother, sick, like the others. No one moved to help her, except the mother. She stood, holding her own daughter close, walked across the room, took the boy from the girl's arms. He was burning, just like hers. She said, "Here, sit with us." The girl hesitated, then obeyed, and just like that, they became a cluster. Not a family, not yet, but something close enough to hurt later. The girl barely spoke. When she did, it was only, "He won't wake up." The mother checked the boy's pulse. It was faint, but there. She shared her water, split what bread she had. There wasn't enough for 2 children, let alone 3. But she pretended there was. That was the first time I gave something I couldn't afford. And I told myself it was just for 1 night. But war doesn't take 1 night. It takes what you offer. And then it asks for more. The mother wrapped the 3 of them in 1 blanket. Their fevers radiated back at her like ghosts pressing into her skin. She stayed awake, watching, listening. The coughs, the murmurs, the hunger that lived inside every sound. And somewhere in the distance, boots, marching above them, closer, or maybe just memory. By morning, Her daughter was no better. Her skin was clammy, her lips dry. The refugee boy was unconscious, breathing, but not moving. The girl stared at them both, eyes rimmed with sleepless red. "He's getting worse." The mother didn't answer, because she didn't know how to lie anymore. A soldier made rounds, handed out rations, hard bread, a sip of murky water, and a cap. She gave her piece to the girl, then took the boy's and pressed it to her daughter's lips. The girl said, "What about you?" The mother just smiled. "I'm not hungry." She was starving, but guilt eats more than hunger ever could. "I thought the worst thing was watching your child get sick. But the truth is, the worst thing is pretending you believe they'll get better, when you already know they won't." That night, her daughter called out, half asleep, burning up, "Mama, don't go." The mother's heart shattered, but her voice was calm. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, she meant it. On the 4th day underground, the child stopped speaking. Not out of defiance, not out of sleep, just stopped. Her eyes followed movement, but her mouth made no sound. Her body curled inward, like it was already trying to disappear. The mother whispered stories to her anyway, about snow that sang and wolves that danced, about a warm kitchen and a red candy that still sat uneaten in a pocket somewhere. The child blinked slowly, but didn't respond. The mother knew what that meant. The line wasn't coming, it was here. Thin, cold, final. A choice was forming in the back of her throat. It tasted like metal. That evening, the refugee girl placed something in the mother's hand. A drawing, 3 figures, 2 women, 1 child, curled together under a blanket. One figure had long hair, hers, and the caption written in crooked, uneven handwriting. "Us." The mother said nothing. She folded the paper, tucked it into her coat. She wasn't strong enough to look at it again. Then came the boots, the real ones. Soldiers, returning for one last evacuation. They called names. They handed out a final ration of bread and tickets, thin slips of paper that looked like nothing, but meant everything. Only 1 per child, and only if they passed inspection. One soldier approached the cluster. He looked down at the girl, the boy, and the silent mother holding a sleeping, fevered child. "Which one is yours?" The mother hesitated. "Too long. This one," she said finally, touching her daughter's hand. The soldier nodded. "She doesn't look strong." The mother didn't argue. Later that night, she sat against the cold wall, holding the pass in one hand, the drawing in the other, and she broke. They said only healthy children had a chance, that the sick ones would slow the convoy down, that the doors would close, that we'd all die anyway. I had to choose between being a mother and doing something a mother should never do. She pulled her daughter close, wrapped her in the blanket, and whispered into her ear, "I'm sorry, my love. I'm going to do something you won't understand." She stood, walked across the bunker to the outer door, stepped outside into the corridor, closed it behind her, and then she turned the key. From inside, a cry. Not a scream, a sound more fragile than that. "Mama!" Then the pounding, then the soldier's voice. "You locked it? You're insane!" She stood still, frozen. Didn't answer, didn't explain, not yet, because there were no words big enough to hold what she'd just done. "I didn't do it to survive. I did it so someone else could." The door clicked shut behind her. The sound echoed down the corridor like a verdict. She stood motionless for a moment, eyes wide, hands shaking, breath not quite catching. Behind that door, her baby, wrapped in a blanket, still crying, but the latch wouldn't turn now. She had made sure of that. The hallway ahead was damp, concrete walls sweating condensation. The lights overhead flickered in exhausted pulses, too dim to feel like safety. She walked, Not because she knew where to go, but because staying still felt like suffocating. She passed strangers, hollow-eyed, wrapped in blankets, sleeping upright, backs against stone. No one spoke, not to her, not to each other. They were past conversation, past comfort, just bodies waiting for something that hadn't come in weeks. Her knees nearly buckled as she reached the central chamber. It had once been a train platform, now lined with makeshift partitions made of tarp, wood, whatever had survived the collapse. She found a corner, sat down hard, clutched the pass in her fist until it crumpled. It didn't matter now. There was no one left to give it to. She stared at her hands, blood under her nails, a rip across her knuckles. She didn't remember when it happened. All she could remember was the way the key turned, the sound of her daughter's cry hitting the metal, and the silence that came after. There are moments where you don't cry, not because you're strong, but because you've already shattered too many times to come apart again. Someone dropped a blanket at her feet. The nurse, still alive, still watching. "Take it," the nurse said. The mother looked up. Her voice didn't come at first. Then, "There's a child in the other room." The nurse blinked slowly, then looked away. "There are children everywhere." She took the blanket, not for herself, but because her body was shaking, not from cold, from the aftershock. The kind that comes after you survive something you shouldn't have. She didn't sleep that night. She listened to the breathing around her, to the creaking pipes above, to the silence coming from the locked door behind her. Every second stretched like string between her ribs. She almost expected to hear her child again, screaming, calling for her. But the sound never came, and that silence was worse. She used to say "Mama" when she wanted water, when she was scared, when she needed anything. Now, I prayed I'd never hear her say it again. Somewhere deep in the shelter, a siren crackled. False alarm, or maybe just another section collapsing. No one moved. No one flinched. They were used to it now. They had all done things they didn't speak of. They had all lost something that used to have a name. And she sat alone, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, holding a piece of paper that no longer meant anything, and tried to pretend the child still crying in her head was only a memory. The next morning, the mother woke up to a child's voice. Not her child, a boy, thin, soot on his cheeks, curled in the corner beside her. Someone had left him there in the night, or maybe he'd wandered over. No one said anything. No one asked. He was breathing through his mouth, shallow and rapid. His lips cracked. His eyes darted between faces like a rabbit waiting for the trap to close. She didn't touch him, didn't speak, but she pulled her blanket wider, just slightly, just enough. And after a moment, the boy crawled under it without a word. That was how it started. A new pair of ribs pressed against hers. Another fevered breath to count. Another small hand curled around the edge of the world. The soldier brought bread, 2 pieces, hard, bitter. He looked at the boy, then at her. Didn't ask where he came from, didn't care. He just marked a new name on his board. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe it was easier not to. She took the bread, broke it in half, gave both pieces away, one to the boy beside her, one to the girl with the drawings, curled across the tunnel. She didn't even try to eat. Someone muttered behind her, "She always gives it away. She's not even feeding her own." Another voice, "Maybe she doesn't have one anymore." They thought she didn't hear, but she did. I used to dream of feeding her. Warm milk, fresh bread. Just once, her belly full, her cheeks red from sleep. But down here, dreams are just the parts of your soul that didn't adjust yet. That night, someone coughed blood in the dark. No one moved. Someone else began to cry. A dry cry. No tears left. Still, no one moved. She pressed her back to the wall, closed her eyes and tried to remember the smell of her daughter's hair after a bath. Lavender, warmth, safe, but memory decays fast underground. All she could conjure now was the sound of her daughter's voice calling out, small, pleading, "Mama." She tried not to think about whether her baby had stopped crying yet. She told herself she'd locked the door for a reason, a noble one, to stop the sickness from spreading, to keep the others safe, to keep one child alive so maybe many more could survive. But it didn't feel noble. It felt like silence, like guilt she'd buried under a borrowed blanket and a stranger's son. That night, the refugee girl came back, no longer drawing, just sitting, hands raw from cold. The mother sat beside her, offered nothing. The girl didn't expect it. They didn't speak, but for the first time, the girl leaned her shoulder against the mother's side, and they stayed that way until the lights dimmed again. It's strange what replaces love in a place like this. Pressure, warmth, friction from another heartbeat that says, "I'm still here." One morning, the boy beside her opened his eyes and whispered, "Did you lose someone?" She didn't answer, not because she didn't want to, but because the question had no shape, no top, no bottom. She couldn't hold it long enough to respond, so she nodded. That was enough. Later that day, she looked down the corridor, to the door she had locked. No one had opened it. No one had asked to. She wondered, had the crying stopped? Or had they all just stopped listening? It happened during the 4th week underground. The cold sharpened like teeth. The ration line got shorter, not because the food increased, but because the people didn't. Someone died in their sleep. Another simply didn't wake up. No one cried anymore. There were no goodbyes, just the sound of blankets being folded, spaces being taken, bread being split between fewer mouths. One night, a girl 2 bunks down began shivering. Hard. Her brother, no older than 5, sat up, pressed his body to hers, but it wasn't enough. They didn't have a blanket. Theirs had been taken days ago, in an argument no one wanted to remember. The mother watched. She had 2 blankets, one wrapped around her, one wrapped around the boy curled at her side. The refugee girl slept beside her, using only her coat. She stared at the second blanket. It wasn't extra. It was earned. It had kept the boy from freezing. It had dried the cough from the girl's chest. It had become a wall, a barrier, a definition of who was hers. But now, that wall was someone else's prison. She stood, walked quietly, unwrapped the blanket, and laid it across the shivering girl. Didn't wait to be thanked. Didn't expect to be. Just walked back, sat down, and let the cold in. I wanted to believe it meant something. That maybe a small good could undo a bigger wrong. But giving a blanket doesn't erase locking a door. The next morning, chaos. A scream, then shouting. Someone had stolen a ration. Bread gone. A fight broke out near the back of the tunnel. 2 men, fists flying. Someone hit their head against the wall. The soldier, young, panicked, tried to stop it, failed. The nurse stepped in, as always. Her voice cut through the noise. "If you act like animals, you'll die like them." Silence fell. The mother watched from the shadows, her hands wrapped around the boy's thin wrist. Later, the soldier approached her, held out a crust of bread. "We found 1 loaf left, for the ones who aren't fighting." She took it, broke it in 3. The boy got the biggest piece. The refugee girl got the next. The last, she held in her hand, stared at it, then walked to the girl she'd given the blanket to, offered it. The girl took it without a word. Her brother smiled, small, crooked, starving. I hated myself for doing the right thing, because it didn't bring her back, because it didn't fix anything, because it felt like pretending I was still worthy of her name in my mouth. That night, the mother lay awake, The boy snored softly beside her. The refugee girl held her sketchbook, but didn't draw, just stared at the blank page. The mother asked, "What would you draw?" The girl replied, "You, but not here." The mother turned away. She couldn't bear to be remembered in any other light. And somewhere beyond the concrete, behind the locked door, in the silence she'd created, she wondered if her child had already forgotten her face. The boy beside her started coughing. It was soft at first, barely a whisper in the stale air. She sat up quickly, pressed her hand to his forehead. Warm, too warm. The girl stirred, watched, didn't speak. The mother knew that fever, knew its curve, its slope, its cliff. It was the same one her daughter had. The last night they were together, she pulled the boy close, held him tighter, wrapped the blanket around him, and prayed the warmth would fool the sickness. But it didn't. By morning, his lips were dry, his breathing uneven, his eyes glassy. The nurse came, kneeling down beside them, pressed her fingers to the boy's throat, then to his temple. Her face didn't change. Just this: "He won't make it without medicine." The mother nodded. "Do you have any?" The nurse stood. "No." The silence that followed was long, not angry, not hopeless, just real. Hope is a noise people make when they have enough food. Down here, it's quiet. The mother stood, walked to the far wall, the place where the light used to shine from the staircase. Now dark. She pressed her hands to the stone, felt the cold bite into her palms, closed her eyes, and saw her daughter's face, not crying, not coughing, just watching, waiting for her to come back. But she wouldn't. She had locked the door, and with each day that passed, with each cough, with each slow breath beside her, she began to understand. She had saved no one, not her daughter, not this boy, not herself. She turned back to the child, his body small in the blanket, his skin pale, his hand reaching up toward nothing. She sat down, held his fingers, pressed her forehead to his, and whispered, "I'm sorry." Not for him, for the other child, for the one behind the door, for the one who cried and was never answered. There is a kind of silence that lives under your ribs. It doesn't make sound. It just waits. And no matter what you do next, it will follow you. Because once you turn the key, once you walk away, you don't get to call yourself a mother anymore. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat beside the boy, fed him the last of her water, dipped a cloth in condensation from the walls, held it to his forehead, listened to his breathing, to the slowness, to the pauses. And she didn't pray. She didn't believe in that anymore. But when his breath finally evened out, when his chest rose with something that felt like strength, she almost cried. Almost, but the tears didn't come. She had spent them elsewhere. She looked at the girl beside them, still awake, still drawing. One page held a sketch of 3 shapes under one blanket. The second, a woman sitting by a wall, her face blank, her hand pressed against a locked door. And in the top corner of the drawing, one word was written. Before, she was drawing the moment I became someone else, and she didn't even know it. They came in the morning, not with sirens, not with salvation, just boots in the hallway, echoing like the countdown to something final. A government unit, 3 soldiers, 1 medic. Their faces were unreadable, their voices exhausted, mechanical. Evacuation batch 7B, final call. The nurse approached them first, whispered low to the mother. "They're taking healthy children, only 1 per household. You have maybe an hour." The mother blinked. "And the sick ones?" The nurse looked away. "They slow the trucks down." The boy was still alive, still burning, still holding on. The mother knelt beside him, brushed the hair from his forehead, His skin was wet, fever sweat. His lips cracked when he tried to speak. No words, just a sound like forgetting. She turned to the girl, still sketching, still watching. The girl's eyes flicked to the soldier near the stairs, then back to the mother, then to the boy. No one had to say it. There was one pass, one chance, one space in the truck, and 2 children who would not survive another week underground. This is what war does. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It doesn't wait until you've healed. It just knocks and asks you to decide who walks out with you and who doesn't. The soldier approached, held out the paper, thin, stamped, impossibly light. 1 child, 1 adult, you have to move fast. The mother held it in her hand. It didn't feel like a lifeline. It felt like a loaded weapon. She looked at the boy, then the girl, then down the dark tunnel, to the door she had once locked, to what waited behind it, or what no longer did. The soldier said, "Choose quickly," and walked away. She sat down, the pass in her lap, her hands trembling, not from fear, from knowing I had already made an unthinkable choice once, and now the world was asking me to make another. The first time, I locked the door. This time, I had to choose which child still had one to open. She looked at the girl, and the girl looked back, didn't ask, didn't plead, just waited. The boy stirred in his fevered sleep. His fingers reached for something that wasn't there, and the mother knew whatever she decided next, she wouldn't be able to undo it. She couldn't sleep. She didn't even lie down. Instead, she sat on the concrete floor beside the boy, watching his chest rise and fall, slow, unsure. Each breath sounded like it had to convince his lungs to keep trying. The girl had finally curled up, her head on a folded coat, her sketchbook still open beside her. Midline, she'd been drawing the door again, the same one the mother had locked, always from the outside, always from the angle of someone left behind. The past sat in the mother's lap, unfolded, crinkled, staring up at her like it knew what she was about to do. She tried not to look at it, tried to focus on the boy's face, on the beads of sweat on his temple, on the crack in the wall behind him, on anything that wasn't a choice. But there was no avoiding it now. The nurse came in the middle of the night. No words, just a flask of warm water. She left it without speaking. But as she turned to go, she paused. Then, over her shoulder, "You can lie to everyone else, but not to the child you leave behind." And then she was gone. The mother stared at the flask, then at the pass, then at her own hands, and suddenly, she stood. She took out the worn scrap of paper she kept folded inside her coat, the one she'd started to write for her daughter the night she locked the door. She unfolded it now, flattened it across her knee, and added one more line. Just one. "I did it once, I'll do it again, and I'll live with the silence it leaves behind." Then she tore it out, folded it, and tucked it into the boy's coat, deep inside, where no one would find it unless they looked hard. Not for him, for the girl, for someone, for anyone who might wonder why. She looked over at the sleeping girl. Her lips were parted slightly, still young, still unbroken, and the mother knew this was it. She picked up the pass, walked to the girl's coat, slipped it into the inside pocket, then paused, looked at her one last time, and whispered, "You'll never know why, but you'll live. That will have to be enough." She returned to the boy, sat down, pulled him gently into her arms, rocked him until his breathing evened, and in the dark, she began to hum. Not a song, just a sound. A mother's lullaby with no words left, only a rhythm meant to outlast the memory of what she had done. You don't decide who you love most in a war. You decide who you can let go of and still stay alive enough to love someone again. The lights flickered. Outside, boots began to echo again. Morning was coming, and with it, The door. Morning came with no warmth, just a whistle of wind through a cracked vent, the scraping of boots on steel, and an announcement echoing through the chamber. Final evac convoy in 15 minutes, registered children only, no exceptions. The girl woke first, the pass already in her coat. She touched it, confused, then looked at the mother, eyes asking what her voice didn't dare. The mother simply nodded once. Soft, certain. The girl opened her mouth to protest, but the mother spoke first. He's not going to make it. Her voice didn't shake. But you still can. The girl stood slowly. Tears brimmed but didn't fall. She crossed the room, knelt beside her brother, touched his hair. I don't want to leave him. The mother didn't answer, because what could she say? The soldier returned, clipboard in hand, checking coats, tagging wrists. He looked at the girl, scanned her ID. Let's go? You're up? She hesitated, then reached for the mother's hand, held it tight. Come with us. The mother crouched to meet her eyes. You won't survive if I slow you down. She pulled the girl close, whispered, live loud enough for both of us. She watched as the girl stepped toward the hallway, paused at the door, turned back, and said, You're her, aren't you? The mother blinked. Who? The woman in the drawing. She didn't reply, but the girl already knew. The boy stirred, a low whimper, a flutter of pain. The soldier raised an eyebrow. He doesn't look evac ready. The mother pulled the boy closer. He's staying, and just like that, the girl was gone. Into the tunnel, into the light. The mother carried the boy to the far room, the one no one entered anymore. The one with the heavy steel door, the same kind she had turned the key on once before. It had no windows, just a small light bulb, still flickering, a crate in the corner, a water bottle, a faded blanket. She laid him down gently, sat beside him. The door stood open. For now, she waited, until the voices outside grew louder, until the boots got closer. Then she stood, stepped outside, and pulled the door shut. The lock was stiff, old, rusted from weeks of condensation, but still, it turned. Click! Metal into metal. The boy woke just as it happened, a thump against the door. Then another, no shouting, no understanding, just a child, alone in a locked room, his fists asking a question no one would ever answer. The soldier from the hall turned the corner, saw her there, staring at the door. What the hell are you doing? She didn't respond. He reached for the handle. She blocked it. There's nothing in there for you. There's a kid in there. Not yours, she said. And then, softer. Not mine anymore either. The worst part wasn't the sound. It wasn't the echo of his fists on the door. It was how quickly the world went silent after, as if even grief decided to look away. The soldier stood in place. He didn't argue again, just looked at her like she was already something half dead, then turned and walked away. She sat down beside the door, back pressed to the cold steel, closed her eyes, listened to the faint sobs until they faded, until they stopped. She didn't leave the door for hours, not because she hoped to open it again, but because she didn't know how to walk away from something so final. The metal was cold against her spine. Her body ached. Her hands trembled when she tried to hold them still. But the worst part was inside her chest, the silence, that unbearable silence, because eventually, even a child crying has to stop. From sleep, from exhaustion, or from something else. And when he did, the world felt empty in a way no war had ever made it feel before. A soldier passed again. Didn't speak, didn't even look. She no longer existed in the story they were trying to write. A few others remained in the shelter, those too weak to move, too numb to care. The nurse sat against a wall with her arms crossed and her eyes closed. The girl with the sketchbook was gone now, on the convoy, out in the snow, alive, maybe. The mother finally stood. Her legs barely held her. She walked to her corner, found her coat, her scarf, the paper she had written weeks ago. She unfolded it, traced her own handwriting with shaking fingers. She added nothing this time. There were no more words to give. I thought I would be relieved, that I had made peace with it. But what I felt was quieter, like someone had turned the volume down on the world, and I was still here, watching the snow fall on things no one would remember. She left the letter folded in the boy's coat, not because she thought anyone would find it, but because it had to live somewhere, even if he didn't. That night, she crept back to the locked room, placed her hand flat against the door. The metal was cold. Still, she pressed her forehead to it, and for a moment, just one, she imagined she could feel warmth on the other side. A little breath, a heartbeat, a miracle. But it was only the heat from her own skin, slowly fading. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Tears were for grief. What she carried now was beyond that. The next morning, the nurse was gone. The lights had dimmed for the last time. No one said goodbye. Because there were no more people to say it, she walked down the empty corridor, past the sleeping bags, past the empty cans, past the echoes of laughter that never sounded right down here. She climbed the stairs slowly, hand over hand, one breath at a time. At the top, a hatch, rusty, heavy. She pushed it open, and for the first time in weeks, she felt the cold wind on her face. Not the chill of the bunker, but real wind, from sky, from trees, from the world she had left behind. She stepped outside, into the snow. The sun was low, orange, bleeding through the clouds like it didn't want to rise all the way. Her boots crunched in the frost. She walked with no destination. Just away. I didn't save the world. I didn't save my daughter. I didn't even save myself. I just gave the door one more turn and waited for the silence to become part of me. She didn't know how long she walked. Through ash, through snow, through forests burned into bone. No destination, no direction, only forward, because behind her was a locked door and a child who would never open it again. The world was quieter than it used to be. Even the birds had forgotten how to sing. A fox crossed her path once, thin, gray, its ribs showing through patchy fur. It stopped, watched her, didn't run. Predator and prey had long stopped keeping track of who was who. She reached a ridge by dusk. Below it, a village burned weeks ago. Only the stone chimneys remained. A frozen river cut through it, cracked in places. And at the edge of the ruins, a laundry line, still fluttering with cloth. It waved to no one. She sat there, on a rock, her knees pulled to her chest. Didn't eat, didn't sleep, just listened to the wind, and every now and then, in the whistle of the trees, she thought she heard him, her son, calling for her, but it was only wind. It was always only wind. She opened her coat. Inside, she still carried the girl's sketchbook. She didn't know why. Maybe because it had pictures of moments she could no longer hold in her memory. Moments before the door, before the fever, before the silence. She turned a page. There she was, drawn in pencil, sitting by a steel door, face blank. Another, handing a piece of bread to a boy who wasn't hers. Another, 3 blankets, 3 shadows, one of them fading. She remembered things the way I couldn't, because guilt erases more than time ever will. That night, she slept by a tree, wrapped in what little she had left, dreamed of the bunker. Only this time, it wasn't underground. It was a house, warm, sunlit, and her child opened the door, ran to her, laughed. But just before the dream faded, the house caught fire. and her child didn't run back out. She woke to the sound of footsteps. Light, unsteady, she froze, gripped the stick she'd fashioned as a weapon, held her breath. A figure emerged from the trees, small, not the girl, not the boy, someone else, a child, no more than 4, wearing a coat too big for his frame, barefoot, silent, his eyes wide with the kind of terror you don't get from stories, only from surviving one. She didn't move, neither did he. The wind moved between them. Then, he stepped closer. She opened her coat, not to offer safety, not yet, just warmth. He hesitated, then sat down beside her, didn't speak, didn't ask who she was, just leaned into her side, like he had done it before, like this was what people did when the world had no more shelters left to give. She placed her hand on his back, felt the bones, the thin skin, the shallow breath, and something cracked inside her. Not grief, not hope, just something brittle that still knew how to reach. I wasn't a mother anymore, but my body still remembered what it meant to keep a child warm, even if it wasn't mine, especially because it wasn't. The child fell asleep first. She stayed awake, listening to the snowfall, to his breathing, to the hush of the world as it tried to begin again. She closed her eyes, didn't pray, just pressed her hand to his shoulder and whispered, "I'm still here." Morning came without color, just cold. The boy was still sleeping, tucked into the crook of her arm, his hands clenched loosely, his mouth slightly open. Alive, but for how long? She didn't know. She rose gently, careful not to wake him, and walked toward the edge of the clearing. A few charred logs marked what once was a home. Beside them, ashes, scraps, shreds of someone else's life. That's when she saw it, half buried beneath soot and frost. A scrap of cloth, wrapped in it, a page. No envelope, just paper, crumpled, singed at the edges. She unfolded it carefully, hands trembling not from the cold this time, but from something deeper, older. Recognition. The handwriting was hers. The words, torn, smudged, but still there. "My sweet child, if you're reading this, then maybe you survived. That's all I ever wanted, even if I wasn't beside you." She stopped. The ink blurred under her thumb. Her throat tightened. "I didn't abandon you. I just knew. If you stayed with me, you'd die. But if I left first, maybe, just maybe, you'd live." A bird flapped in a tree above her, a sound so sudden it almost broke her concentration. But she didn't look up. Her eyes never left the page. "I wasn't strong enough to protect you, but I was clear-headed enough not to make another mistake." She folded the letter once more, tucked it into the inside of her coat, and just stood there, in the ruins, in the wind, holding the words she'd written when she thought she'd already lost everything. We never expect the words we whisper in desperation to outlive us, but sometimes they crawl through fire and ash and memory and land in someone else's hands. She returned to the boy. He was awake now, but didn't speak. His eyes followed her movements, cautious, not afraid, just unsure. She reached into her coat again, this time pulling out the girl's sketchbook. She tore a blank page from the back, laid it on a flat rock, then pulled a charcoal stub from the bottom of her bag, from the bunker, from before, and slowly, quietly, she began to draw. Not herself, not the boy, but a door, the kind that locks from the outside, with a shadow of a woman kneeling before it. Her hand pressed flat, her head bowed. The boy leaned over, watched, pointed. "Sad?" he asked. His voice was small, unused, rough. She nodded. Didn't explain further. He reached for the charcoal, drew something beside the door. a stick figure, holding a smaller one. Then he smiled. He didn't know what I'd done, and maybe he never would, but he saw a mother in me anyway, and for one breath, I let myself believe that was enough. She folded the drawing, tucked it beside the letter, and whispered to the wind, "If you ever find her, tell her I remembered. Elsewhere, beyond the frost, beyond the ridges, beyond the places where silence still hung in the trees." A girl opened a notebook. Her hands shook as she turned each page, not from cold, but from memory. She was safe now. That's what they said. A resettlement camp, clean sheets, soup, a number instead of a name. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the steel door, still locked, still echoing, still pulsing with a voice no one else could hear. She had drawn her, again and again, the woman with the scarf pulled tight, the eyes that never cried in front of anyone, the hands that always gave until there was nothing left. The girl didn't know her name, but she remembered her face, and sometimes that was enough. That night, she sat near the corner of her tent, knees pulled to her chest, sketchbook balanced on her legs. She turned to a blank page, breathed in, and began. A hand pressed to glass, a child's silhouette on the other side, snow falling behind them both, and across the bottom, a single word written in pencil. "Forgiven?" She paused, stared at the page, then reached for a second drawing, an older one, the woman standing in front of the boy, holding the bread, not eating. She had drawn that memory weeks ago, but now she added something new, a small flame, burning in the distance, faint, barely there, but warm. She tore the sketch from her book, folded it, and placed it inside a tin can she'd saved from dinner. Over it, she placed the charred remnant of a letter someone had found in a coat pocket. A letter they said had no recipient, no sender, but the girl had recognized the writing. She never knew if the woman had lived, but what mattered more was that someone had tried to save a child that wasn't theirs, tried to believe that a locked door wasn't the end of love, but maybe its most brutal form. She left the can by the fence of the resettlement camp, where others had begun to leave flowers, pictures, pieces of stories that had no homes. And as she walked away, she whispered, "You didn't disappear. I remembered." The wind picked up, blew dust over the path, but the sketches stayed, a memory left in pencil for someone, anyone, who might need to believe that sacrifice wasn't the same as forgetting. In a world that forgets women like her, all I could do was draw her back into existence. The snow had grown deeper. Each step took more effort now. Each breath stung colder. The boy held her hand as they walked, his fingers thin, his nose red. He didn't ask where they were going. He only asked once, "Will there be trees there?" She didn't answer, because even hope had grown quiet in her throat. They crossed a frozen stream that had split down the middle. A dead animal lay half buried in the bank. The boy looked at it, didn't flinch. He had already learned not to be surprised by loss. That night, they found shelter beneath a half-collapsed bridge. A piece of tarp, a broken crate, enough to sit under, barely. She pulled him close and wrapped what was left of her coat around them both. He fell asleep quickly, chest rising and falling against hers. His warmth felt impossible, like it didn't belong to this world. She watched the sky through the cracks. No stars, only gray, but the silence tonight was softer, less punishing, less like the silence behind a steel door, and more like something that waited patiently. She reached into her coat, pulled out the folded drawing, the one the boy had made, a stick figure, a taller one beside it, 2 simple lines connecting their hands. He hadn't said what it meant, but she knew. She turned the page over, wrote 3 words in the corner, in barely legible pencil. We kept walking. There was no rescue, no great return, But there was a hand and a heartbeat, and that was enough to keep moving. In the morning, they kept walking, past the river, past a rusted car half swallowed by snow, past the skeleton of a church steeple. She didn't know what they were heading toward, but neither of them asked to turn back. The boy coughed once, held tighter to her hand. She squeezed his fingers and whispered, "You're not alone." And though he didn't reply, his pace never faltered. Later that day, they found a scarf tied to a tree, red, faded, blowing gently. A marker, a message, or maybe nothing at all. But she paused before it, untied it slowly, wrapped it around the boy's neck, then looked up at the tree, placed her palm flat against its bark, and said quietly, "Someone was here. We leave signs for each other, not to be found, but to say, I was real, I tried, I made it this far." They walked until the light faded again. The world had not forgiven her, but the boy had not let go. And in the cold, silent places of what remained, that was enough. She was never found, not by soldiers, not by search teams, not by anyone who could give her a name in a database or a line in a report, but the scarf she tied around the boy's neck, that remained. And the sketches, the letter, the memory passed between trembling hands at refugee camps, those remained too. No one remembered the door, or the cries, or the bolt she slid into place while the world watched in horror, but someone remembered her eyes, and the way she held the boy she didn't know, like she had loved him since birth. There was no monument, no grave, but there was a tree, deep in the woods, and tied around it a scarf, red, weathered, softened by wind and time. Just beneath it, someone had carved a single word into the bark. Mother, she didn't save the world. She didn't even save the child she bore. But she saved something else. A heartbeat, a sketch, a single warm breath. And maybe that's all a person ever can. She didn't save the world. She didn't even save the child she bore. But she saved something else. A heartbeat, a sketch, a single warm breath, and maybe that's all a person ever can. The sketchbook opens. On the first page, a child and a mother, stick figures. Simple. On the second, the steel door, a hand pressed against it from the outside. On the final page, a single scene. The boy and the woman, standing beneath a tree, snow falling, their hands clasped, but neither of them smiling, only standing, still here, still alive. No one knows her name, no one wrote it down, but in the lines of a drawing, she still breathes. I don't need forgiveness, I don't expect it, I just hope that in some dream, you'll run into my arms and tell me I did the right thing. Music fades in, a soft hum, a lullaby without words. In the distance, a sound of quiet laughter, a child's, then wind, then silence. The screen fades to black, then a snow-covered tree, a red scarf tied tight, swaying, no words, only the image, and maybe a heartbeat beneath it. If it were you, would you have held on or walked away so they had a chance to live? If this story left you speechless, please leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel so we can continue listening to the memories that were never told.